You are watching Mentor English Professor MA Raza. We have lot of other electronic channels for the betterment of society. For example, Palia TV1, Mentor English, Mentor Urdu, Mentor Turkish, Mentor uh, Arabic, and Jame Darulum Sheikhul Islam. So must subscribe and hit the bell icon to all. Thanks, my online family. I love you all. Welcome back, my dear viewers, my dear subscriber, my dear watchers, and my students and the teachers of the private schools and colleges. Today, the topic is very significant, the rise of the novel in the 17th century. So, let's get started. The 17th century was, for many reasons, the midway between its immediate antecedent, such as epics and romances, and the novel itself. The popularity of heroic romances was in vogue until 1600, towards the end of the 16th century, and in the beginning of the 17th, burlesque and picaresque and picaresque tales started emerging on the scene of the English literature. These were the new kinds of romances already accepted by the English literary circles. It was the time when servants 1547 to 1616 wrote has a very famous Don Quisto or Don Questi 1605, and tried making fun of the existing romances of the time, in which the chivalric heroic were fighting against giants and dragons. Written in the burlesque literary trend, the hero of Don Quixote was fighting against windmills in a funny style, creating laughters for the readers. Initially written in Spanish, it is widely considered as the first modern European novel. Ephraim 1640 to 1689 wrote a novel with the title of Orinoco, or the History of the Royal Slave 1688, which is sometime regarding as the first English novel. Ephraim, also considered as the first non-professional female writer, showed through her writings the human slavery, degradations, and suffering in the hands of fellow humans. As the foremother of English female writers, Ben's text is considered crucial in the history of the novel. Another big name from the 17th century scene of the novel is John Bunyan, 1628 to 1688, who was a contemporary of Ephraim, and who also contributed towards the rise of the English novel. At the time, he wrote The Pilgrim's Progress 1678, which was the bestseller of its time. It was religious story of the pilgrims' lives. He also wrote the life and deaths of Mr. Badman 1680. In total, he wrote some 60 titles, and most of them in the form of expanded sermons. These works by servants Ephraim, John Bunyan, and others were very much resembling the new emerging genre, which was ultimately called the novel. These were very similar to the novel in terms of their structures, forms, plots, characterization, settings, and conflicts. These were very meetings these very meeting the dimensions of the modern novel, and had beginning, conflict, rise in action, fall in action, and resolution. That's why these names are considered as the forerunner of the novel, including the writers of these early novels and that of the writers of the epic poetry and romances during the 17th century. Let me repeat it for you. These works by servants Ephra Ben, John Bunyan, and others were very much resembling the new emerging genre, which was ultimately called the novel. These were very much similar to the novel in terms of their structures, forms, plots, characterizations, settings, and conflicts. These very meeting the dimensions of the modern novels and had beginning conflict conflict, rise in action, fall in action, and resolution. That's why these names are considered as the forerunners of the novel, including the writers of these early novels and that of the writers of the epic poetry and romances during the 17th century. Thus, we Thus, we safely say that during the 17th century, the English novel took a very new shape under the influence of the French and Spanish novelists. The French romances greatly influenced early English fiction. In England, romances are now known as the heroic chivalric romances of the 17th century. These heroic romances were completely removed from everyday real life. Later on, Afraban and several other male and female writers cultivated a new form of prose fiction, being very realistic in nature. It preserved the true sides of human life. Among the most important writers of the 17th century were these big names servants, Afraban and John Bunyan. Novels such as Don Quisto or Don Quixote, Orinoco, the life and death of Mr. Badman, and the pilgrims of and the pilgrims progress come nearer to the modern novel. Their works undoubtedly paved the ways for the rise of the novel in the 18th century. That is the topic of our next important point and next section, the rise of the novel in 18th century. The rise of the novel in 18th century. The 18th century is the major milestone in the history of novel as literary genre. It is regarded as the real beginning of the English novel for many genuine reasons to be highlighted in this section. The book that contributed most to establish the conventional story of the novel's emergence in the 18th century Britain is Aeon Watts' The Rise of the Novel, 1957, a book of rare appreciation and critical importance that it continues to elicit elaborations and corrections even over half century after its publication, focusing his study on early novelists including Richardson, Defoe, and Fielding. What argues that the lowest common denominator of the novel genre is its formal realism exhibited by the 18th century. Most of the experts regards the 18th century as the period of the birth of novel and its subsequent progresses and development as a genre, having adequate literary predecessors including John Bunyan, Ephra Ben, Geoffrey Chaucer, Thomas Malory, servants Boccaccio or Boccaccio, both you can pronounced, and many other writers of the 17th century. The 18th century writers availed the great opportunity to advance their experiments experiment further and take the novel to the level as a literary genre. Moreover, the increase in literacy ratio, rise in the middle class, industrial revolution, and coming up of mobile libraries created such a favorable situation for the rise of the novel. This new form of literature, namely the novel, which developed from the heroic romances and started depicting the pragmatism and morality of the middle class people, and representing the realistic view of human life. Alexander Pope dictum on realism, men is the appropriate study of mankind itself, highly influenced readers, and they found their major interest in studying human character. The 18th century the 18th century novels thus explored human nature by creating, among other things, the true human characters in novels, unlike the previous superhumans like giants, dragons, as were depicted by heroic romances just before the emergence of the novel. The novel undoubtedly enjoying its highest level of fame and popularity during the 18th century. The major authors of the century, namely Defoe, Fielding, Saturn, and Richardson contributed significantly to the development of the English novel. They greatly influenced their successor writer who started writing novels after them. Books such as Don Quixote, Decameron, Morte d'Arthur, Orinoco, and Pilgrim's Progress had already laid the foundation for the development of the novel during this time. Great novels including Pamela, Joseph Andrew, Tristram Shandy, and Robinson Crusoe were written, which immediately became famous among the readers. However, the novel as a genre continued to evolve during the 19th and 20th century, giving rise to many subgenres or type of it. Daniel Defoe was certainly among the great English novelists who wrote Robinson Crusoe. Defoe is considered as the Daniel Defoe considered as the first great English novelist who not only introduced new techniques in realism but used them creatively in his novel. His novel Robinson Crusoe is thus considered as the first great English novel showing the realistic picture of life. Some critic considers it as the first modern novel, considering its modern features. In short, Defoe created his novel with features of genuine modern novel. Some critics, on the basic on the basis of the elements of adventure and crime so prominent in his works, are of the view that these works should be classed as romances and not as novels. These views apart, the works of Defoe are great early fiction. Steele and Addison also contributed to the evolution of the realistic novel. Thus, the novel find its early shapes in the Spectator, the Tatler, and the Guardian. Samuel Richardson was another great name among the first novelists of the 18th century. He gave the novel many new things which were greatly appreciated. It is said that the novel as a popular genre began with Pamela by Richardson, written in 1740, written in letters style. It was the first true novel that appeared in any literature. The novel is basically the story of a virtuous maid servant who successfully resisted the advances of her masters and is subsequently rewarded by the proposal of marriage by him. His another work, Clarissa also caught up suddenly the attention of his readers. The Samuel Richardson successfully introduced sentimentality into English novel and popularized it as a literary genre. As discussed above, the 18th century is regarded as the golden age of the novel. In this age, there were four novelists of great genius. They include Henry Fielding, Samuel Richardson, Lawrence Saturn, and Tobias Smollett. With them, the novel reached its highest point of glory. For their great work, they are better known as the four wheel of novel. Among them, Fielding is called the father of the English novel. His Joseph Andrew, Tom Jones, Jonathan Wild, and Amelia are considered great novels. He is well known for his theory of novel characterization, realism, and craftsmanship. Richardson was well known for his sentimentality and realism. Smollett certainly widened the scope of the novel, and by introducing some new elements to it, his Humphrey Clinkers is taken among very popular English novels. Saturn's also contributed Saturn's also contributed to the genre of novel for his creative work on modern impressionism. In his novel Tristram Shandy, a very popular novel, he is considered among the pioneers of English novel. Critics believes that the rise of the novel during the 18th century was a result of major steps seen by the centuries, including the democratic movement, the spread of education, thus increasing the number of readers, the appearance of newspapers and magazines, developing the people's habit of reading, and the emergence of the new prose style and the decline of the English drama. These things made way forward for the 18th century novel to flourish and develop. Thus, in the 18th century, the novel Richard, at its climax, summing up the contribution of these great novelists. Rickert said that Richardson has given the novel sentimentality, Fielding humor, and Smollett liveliness. So today we got very important things about the rise of the novel in 18th century. So in our next lecture we will definitely discuss factors that influence the rise of the novel in 18th century. So we will particularly discuss in this next section. So let me go now. Before going, I would like to request you that must subscribe and hit the bell icon. We'll meet in the next lecture. Bye bye.